Hey, what's up? Improvement Warrior, Jason Young, back with you again. Welcome to Improvement Warrior Podcast. This is episode number 61. So this podcast, it's not mine. It is, I don't even know how I got on their email list, but it is Green Street with Patti and Doug Wood. And this one is called Toxic Turf with Barbara Laker and David Gambacorta. So, and I listened to it because obviously it caught my eye because I have artificial turf set up in my garage, and that artificial turf was in my gym. We moved in the gym probably 2011, and I probably got it very, very soon after. And I had it in there for until 2020, and then I sold some of it, and then I brought some of it here into my garage gym. But as soon as I heard this podcast, I took it out, and some of it has been thrown away. I tried to do a bulk pickup with the garbage people, but they came today and wouldn't pick it up because they wanted it cut into pieces and into smaller pieces and tied up. And it's like, if it's in smaller pieces, I'm just going to throw it away. I mean, there's no point. So it's still in my garage. I still got to throw some pieces of it away. But podcast is very interesting. So it's basically going over Veterans Stadium and the Philadelphia Phillies and how they played in there. And I think there was 6 total players that have been diagnosed with, I think it was glioblastoma, which is the brain cancer. No Philadelphia Eagles have, but they were on the turf a lot less than obviously the baseball players. So there's 81 games plus preseason and plus postseason, all that stuff. So if you are, it was in my gym all this time, and I was in there teaching classes. The big thing is they have PFASs, which are known as the forever chemicals. So if I do end up with cancer, then you and I know why. So this stuff it's very, very bad. So if you have a child working out on it, because it is very popular in fitness facilities, especially sport training facilities, which I was, and it was one of the reasons I got it in the first place. Thought I was just following the trend without asking questions, and that's how we get in trouble, is following the trends, wearing sunglasses, doing the sunscreen, doing this diet, that diet, all that stuff without questioning it. So it's important we question everything. So again, it's not my podcast. I'm not trying to copyright infringe, so if I do need to take it down, please let me know, Green Street. But you can get on Green Street's newsletter. I don't know how I got on there, but this one caught my eye. I usually just delete the email. But it's a good email, or a good podcast. I think it's 29 minutes. But what's going on in the world of Improvement Warrior? I've got a new transformation challenge coming up, the Fall into Winter Circadian Rhythm or Circadian Health Transformation. Supposedly it's supposed to start on September the 24th, but I am leaving on a cruise on the 27th, and I'm not sure if I'm going to have internet, so it might be pushed back to the second week of October. But you can check it out. I'll update the website based on what I learn in terms of the internet on the cruise. So it's going down to the Virgin Islands, or the Caribbean islands, St. John, St. Thomas, all that stuff. So get my sunshine right before I get my vitamin D checked. Very awesome. You can check out the challenge at improvementwarriorfitness.com/fall/winter. And of course, we're always looking for reviews. Apple and Spotify are the big ones, so we can get this podcast and help other people change their lives. But if you do know anybody working out on artificial turf, please send this podcast to them, and especially if the artificial turf is outside, because when the heat hits the PFAS and these forever chemicals, it makes them much, much worse. And that was why the Philadelphia Phillies were a lot more affected than the Eagles. So have a listen. Just have a listen, and please share it, and I'll talk to you later. And again, if you have any questions or need individual coaching, you can set up a discovery call with me at improvementwarriorfitness.com/discovery call. And of course, if you are new here, please get on the newsletter. We obviously talk about different things other than nutrition, diet, and exercise. But we still talk about that stuff in a circadian way. So get on the newsletter, improvementwarriorfitness.com/NL. That is where I will send every single thing that you need to know about. And here we go. Enjoy this podcast from Green Street Toxic Turf with Barbara Laker and David Gambacorta. Stay strong, stay positive, be the improvement warrior.
This is Green Street with Patti and Doug Wood, the environmental health show and podcast, keeping you up to date on what in the world is happening and what you need to know to protect yourself and your family in this increasingly toxic world. Welcome back. Artificial turf fields are common at college and professional sports stadiums and thousands of municipal and high school fields across the country. But we're learning that these giant plastic fields come with a heavy price tag nobody wants to pay. A team of reporters from Philadelphia is breaking the story wide open, and everyone from the NFL to local soccer clubs is taking notice. That story's coming up on Green Street, but first, some of the news of the week. What do you got, Patti?
I couldn't leave this one alone. This is about ultra-processed foods.
Okay.
Now, we're not just talking about food here, but we're talking about all the chemicals that are involved in manufacturing ultra-processed foods. And they're worried about them being as addictive as cigarettes, and for good reason.
Okay.
Highly processed foods are addictive for some people because they trigger the cravings, the compulsive consumption, and the other traits associated with tobacco or alcohol substance use disorders. In fact, up to 20% of adults and 15% of kids and adolescents have signs of addiction to ultra-processed foods.
Ultra-processed foods are like what?
Well, these are foods that are manufactured inside industrial factories. That should be a red flag right there. These are foods that are manufactured inside industrial factories, and they contain ingredients that are altered and combined in ways that amp up their fat, their sugar, their salt. But they also include multiple other flavor and sensory enhancements, which are chemicals, to make them so enticing that people can't resist them. Typical ultra-processed foods are breakfast cereals, packaged snacks, fast foods, mass-produced, breads and desserts, reconstituted fish and meat like sausages and hot dogs and fish sticks, and then you get into the ice cream and the candy world and soft drinks. It's basically all the stuff that you find in the middle aisles of grocery stores.
I was just going to say, this is the American diet. This is what everybody's eating.
Yeah, but it is estimated, this is what really got me, it's estimated that close to 60% of the calories consumed in the United States are from these foods.
So more
60%. More than half of what people eat are these highly ultra-processed foods. It's unbelievable. It's really easier to understand this when you know who owns these companies. Okay, you ready for this?
Is this going to be bad news?
So food companies learn from cigarettes, especially since tobacco giant Philip Morris acquired two food companies in the late 80s to form Kraft General Foods, which is now called Kraft Heinz, right? Because There's another
corporate
fast food.
takeovers and stuff.
Expertise and resources were transferred to the food companies from Philip Morris.
In other words, how to addict people to stuff.
How to addict people.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's who's making 60% of the food that Americans eat.
That's correct. That's correct.
Wow.
So, clear nutritional information does not exist on these products, okay? That has, they should have mandatory packagation warning labels like those required for cigarettes.
Nobody's going to read those labels. You've seen those labels where it's so many scientific terms that you can't figure out what. In fact, I always wanted to do this. I always wanted to have a quiz, on the show. I would read the ingredients
and say, "What is this?"
And we'd say, "People, what is this?
What is
Can you
this?
guess what?"
Of course, you couldn't guess what it was.
I think I had the ingredient list for Doritos, and there was absolutely nothing in there.
I did these nutrition programs at the schools, remember?
Yeah.
I had this huge kettle, and I had some dry ice in it, and there's all kind of smoke coming out of it, and I was stirring away, and I was reading a recipe, and I was reading it out loud, and I was reading, okay, a little bit of this chemical, and I had all these like extra little bottles and jars I was putting in, and I was stirring it around, and then I said, okay, I think it's done, and I reached into the pot and I pulled out a bag of Doritos. It was so much fun. And they couldn't believe what I had read on the ingredient list, that those were the things that they were actually eating when they eat a Dorito.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, I know.
So did the industry have some response to
Yes.
to this news?
The industry's response to this, and this is a quote, demonizing shelf-ready foods could limit access to and cause avoidance of nutritious foods, it states. Empowering consumers with clear nutritional information and preserving consumer choice so they can make the right decisions for their personal health goals should be the priority in public health guidance. The group also notes the term ultra-processed doesn't have a clear definition and could lead to consumer confusion.
Yeah, I know. They hate that term. What is that term they use? Shelf-ready?
Yes, demonizing shelf-ready foods.
Shelf-ready foods.
That's right.
In other words, they're ready to go, ready to eat, right out of the package.
Anytime, day or night.
Oh, boy. Okay, well, changing gears here for a minute. If you still have a landline phone, listen up. Because last week, AT&T applied for a waiver that would allow it to stop servicing traditional landlines in California, and soon in a state near you. Both AT&T and Verizon have said they want to move all their customers over to newer infrastructure within the next few years, replacing older copper wire-based telephone system lines, also known, you're going to love this, also known as plain old telephone service, or POTS. That's the acronym. They want to replace them with more advanced technology that doesn't work with landlines. Consumers are going to have to decide whether to give up their landlines or potentially face higher costs because of complex, expensive workarounds from the phone companies. The alternatives might not be as reliable as old-fashioned landlines either, and the process of switching out the old equipment for the new is going to be a massive undertaking. An AT&T spokesman said, quote, "We are focused on enhancing our network with more advanced, higher-speed technologies like fiber and wireless, which consumers are demanding," unquote. And he added that they're not actually canceling landline service in California, but apparently they're just going to make it so expensive that everybody will have no choice except to
use
move
a
over.
cell phone.
Anyone with an analog fax machine, including hospitals and clinics and doctors' offices, all those lines are going to have to be replaced, which is going to cost somewhere between $200 and $400 to replace your...
Right, and there are places that want really secure lines, and they all use landlines.
They sure do.
Yeah. So what are you going to tell them? Too bad?
Pony up, baby. Yeah, too
Pony
bad.
up.
Yeah, too bad is exactly what they're going to say. So this is going to be a real problem in rural areas and disaster-prone areas where copper-based landline service is really critical. About 100 million landlines exist right now between businesses and residential homes.
In California?
No.
Or nationwide?
Nationwide.
Okay.
100 million. So this seems like not the best idea to me. I know it might reduce costs for the telecoms, but copper phone lines don't fail in storms.
That's right.
Hey,
when Hurricane Sandy hit in New York City, people who were living on the 34th or 37th floors could only call 911 and give them information about elevators not being functional and so on with a landline.
That's right.
Their cell phones didn't work.
That's right. So if you have an internet phone, the internet goes down or the power goes out, you have no phone. Phone doesn't work. But that's not the case with POTS, or plain old telephone service. I love that acronym. I'm not an acronym fan, but I love POTS. I think that's great. Anyway, all right. We're going to be talking about artificial turf in a minute. Hang on. We'll be right back. It's a recurring theme in modern society. A new product or service is developed, and before science has a chance to fully investigate all of the pros and cons, marketing plans are created and implemented, and the product or service starts to make money. In some cases, hundreds of millions of dollars. Then eventually science comes along, and it becomes evident that the new product or service has some serious, sometimes even fatal, flaws.
At that point, lawyers and lobbyists get busy defending the new product or service. Government regulations are opposed, marketing budgets are increased to counter bad press, compliant scientists are hired to do studies that cast doubt on any claims of harm. They act as if a legitimate debate exists, so that people of good faith can be comfortable waiting for more science before making any decisions. That was true with asbestos, true with hormone replacement therapy, true with tobacco, and many others too numerous to mention. In every case, commerce got out ahead of science, and the result was serious harm to the public. There's not a lot of scientific debate anymore over whether or not artificial turf fields are safe. While the artificial turf industry has tried to paint this as a legitimate debate where the science isn't clear, that's just spin. The fact is, we know that the chemicals used to manufacture these giant plastic fields are harmful to humans.
David Gambacorta and Barbara Laker are reporters for the Philadelphia Inquirer newspaper. They've been writing about the chemicals in synthetic turf ever since they learned about 6 members of the Philadelphia Phillies baseball team who all died of glioblastoma, an aggressive brain cancer.
In 2022, David West, a former pitcher for the Philadelphia Phillies, that died of glioblastoma, and he at that time became the 6th former member of the Phillies to died of brain cancer. And that piqued Barbara's interest in mine, and we wondered if there could potentially be a connection between these illnesses, because glioblastoma is such a rare form of cancer. And our attention turned to where the Phillies had played from 1971 to 2003, and that was Veterans Stadium. The stadium was demolished in 2004, so we couldn't quite dig it up, but Barbara had started consulting with some scientific experts, and they suggested that we consider looking at the turf. And fortunately, we were able to find actual pieces of the Vets turf on eBay.
Really?
Really?
Yeah. The Phillies had in 1982 given away pieces of their turf, the turf that had actually been on the field when they won the World Series in 1980. And luckily for us, people had kept these little squares of turf in its original plastic, fully sealed for the better part of 4 decades. And we were able to get those samples tested by 2 different labs.
Wow.
Without having to do any research, you could tell just from that they are called forever chemicals, right?
Yeah.
Fresh and ready for investigation.
So you sent them off to the lab. What came back?
Well, so the first lab we took them to, an expert told me to go to Eurofins lab in Lancaster, which is like a primo lab for testing PFAS. And she told me to ask for them to test it for 70 different PFAS. Because as you guys probably know, there's like thousands upon thousands, like 12,000 different kinds of PFAS. And only 2 really have been studied extensively. And so, or not even really extensively, but studied at all. So we asked for the testing of 70 different PFAS, and at that lab, it came back with 16 different PFAS, including one of the ones that they've studied as being a health hazard. And then a couple months later, I had been talking to Graham Peasley, an expert at Notre Dame University, and he's studied PFAS for like years upon years and has a lab where he tests turf across the country, both old and new turf. And he actually offered to, if we got more samples, so David got more samples of the turf, and we mailed those samples to Graham Peasley at Notre Dame, and he tested it too, not as for 70, but he also found several PFAS in the samples that we gave him. And this was, what's amazing is this turf was 40 years old and older. And so if PFAS is still there, 40 years later, it kind of proves that there's a reason why they're called forever chemicals.
Yeah. Wow. Fascinating.
Okay, so how much science did you find that linked the common types of PFAS that were found and glioblastomas? I mean, it's a relatively rare type of brain cancer, but incredibly serious and incredibly dangerous type of I mean, all brain cancers are serious, but this is a particularly fast-growing and
Deadly.
Yeah.
deadly, exactly.
We had been in conversation for months with the Phillies leading up to the publication of the first story, which we had called Field of Dread. We tried to be really transparent with our reporting, and the fact that we had not solved this in so many words. It wasn't like we had sort of an airtight conclusion that we came to. It was more, we'd found these chemicals, and that certainly seemed to suggest a possible link. And right before we had published the story, the Phillies sent us statements, some of which were from a professor at Duke, and he was adamant that there was no way that PFAS could have caused glioblastoma, that it couldn't cross the blood-brain barrier, and sort of seemingly saying that there was this, even to pose this as a possible theory, was wrong. And Barbara reached out to more experts and did quite a bit of 11th hour digging, and found, I think it was 3 different studies. Was it 2 from China and 1 from Italy, Barbara?
Yeah, we had 2 they were all outside the U.S., but they were different studies, and they were very well regarded. And these studies showed that not only PFAS can be found in the brain, so that throughout the whole theory that it can't cross the brain barrier, but also one study found that looked at glioblastoma tumors, that PFAS was actually found in the tumors. Since we published that story, there have been more studies that link glioblastoma to, or that raise the possibility that glioblastoma can be linked to toxins, including PFAS. We're not saying that it caused it. We're not saying anything like that. We're saying that PFAS clearly causes a number of health issues. It's been linked to prostate cancer, kidney cancer, 2 or 3 cancers. But each month, actually, it seems like more health problems are linked to PFAS. And because of that, there's a question, and people are saying, look, we need to study this more, especially when it comes to turf and PFAS in the turf. Because, as you said, the temperatures get really, really hot on the turf. We had, David and I went to archives at both Temple University and City Archives, and it showed that during the time the Phillies players played at the vet, that the temperature of the turf could get up to 160 degrees. And experts told us that when you have a chemical like that and you heat it up, it becomes more toxic. It vaporizes and becomes more toxic. So theoretically, that these players and anyone playing on turf can inhale it. They know it can be absorbed through the skin. And everyone is crying out saying, look, we need more studies on this to know exactly is there a link? And if so, how strong is it? And what action should be taken as a result if it does show that there's a stronger link than what some people suspect. It obviously gave us pause, especially right before we were going to publish, that people, professors at Duke University were saying that it cannot cross the brain barrier. And now we know that at least some studies show that it definitely can.
Right. So this is also interesting. And then, of course, there's the issue of how much exposure is too much. How much, every American is exposed to PFAS somewhere in their lives, whether it's in their water supply and they're showering in it and drinking it. Who knows, what else, uses they have. I mean, some people have gardens and they water their gardens with, PFAS contaminated water. So it's in their food supply. And of course, PFAS is in all food supplies now because it's found in fertilizers, and it's just really kind of ubiquitous in packaging and so many different things. It's one of the most useful chemicals for so many different industries.
Yeah.
It's amazing the volume of PFAS that is produced and used by industry that people are exposed to on a daily basis.
David and I also did a story about the firefighters and the firefighters who are wearing turnout gear that has PFAS in it. And we know from looking at statistics that firefighters have a higher rate of cancer than the general population. Now, we do know that obviously when they go into fires, they're exposed to other chemicals, possible chemicals too, and smoke, and so many, they're exposed to other carcinogens. But we do know that the turnout gear contains PFAS, and obviously when they're wearing the turnout gear and they're fighting fires, they're exposed to a real high level of heat. So you're right. I mean, it's PFAS is everywhere, and there's studies going on across the country now that are trying to determine which is worse, if you inhale it, if you are a kid and you play on turf and you're a goalie and you fall down and you get scrapes on your body. Is it the crumb rubber that's more dangerous or just as dangerous? Is it the PFAS? What is it? And like you said, how dangerous is it? And how often do you have to be playing on that turf?
I know that the Eagles, of course, played in Veterans Stadium as well.
Right.
Did you look at the Eagles and look at their medical conditions at all?
Yeah, that's one of the first questions I think that we got asked with this. And it's really not an apples to apples comparison. The Eagles only have 8 home games a year, and maybe for that period, the 80s and 90s, 1 or 2 preseason games and occasionally a playoff game. And the Phillies, of course, they're there 81 home games. They're there for hours before the game for batting practice, infield practice. And more importantly, they're there in the dog days of summer. When the heat is really focused. Larry Boa, who had been a shortstop for the Phillies in the 70s and later a coach, he remembered watching somebody fry an egg on AstroTurf before a day game in the 1970s. So the exposure for the Phillies is so much higher, and the guys that did die of glioblastoma. Darren Dalton had been on the team for a very long time. John Vukovic had been a player and a coach for years. So their exposure rate was just so much higher than would be for, an Eagle who is maybe lasting with the team for 5 years. We did look into that and didn't come back with anything. But I think the other thing that we were struck by is just that this is not an issue that really had been extensively studied. Nobody was attempting in the 80s and 90s to determine whether or not there were some risks at play that were worth monitoring over the years ahead. So, right now what's emerging is more anecdotal. But I think we're going to be learning a lot, in the next couple of years as studies sort of intensify and it's more attention is being drawn to this issue.
Because the chemical companies knew that PFAS was being used, obviously, in the turf for decades. But all the experts that David and I talked to told us that outside the chemical companies or the turf companies, nobody else was aware that PFAS was actually in the turf until 2019. So decades years and years went by where we weren't even aware. We didn't know that PFAS was in it. And in fact, when David and I started working on this series and I first learned of the term PFAS, I thought I'd never heard of PFAS. And I'm like, what? How do you say that? What is it? What's the full name? And then, of course, we learned a lot more about it. And it was kind of amazing to me that the chemical companies knew about this and knew the dangers of PFAS for a long, long time, and didn't tell anyone that it's not listed as an ingredient because it's used in the manufacturing part. And it's not like you buy a Teflon pan and it says one of the ingredients is PFAS. So I think that's one reason why the studies haven't been all completed yet, because we didn't even know PFAS was in all these things for years and years.
So let me just ask you a question. With all of the research that you did, you have determined, A, that PFAS is actually in the carpet and the blades, the plastic blades, because as you said, when they go through the manufacturing process, they add PFAS so that it doesn't stick, right? It stick in the extruders and in the molds and so on. But is it also in the crumb rubber?
Some people have told me that it might be on the top layer of the crumb where the actual backing of the turf meets the base. And we know that they use PFAS to make the blades stand up. They look pretty with PFAS. They stand up, they separate, so it's supposed to look nicer.
But I'm talking about the crumb rubber, the infill material, the actual tires. Are tires made using PFAS as well?
I haven't heard that. They are using what I forget the long name of it, but it's called PAHs.
Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons.
Right. Oh, you're very good.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that, I swear.
Her and polyfluoroalkyl, you know, I mean, we've got all these things on the tip of our tongues, but
say that again 10 times real fast. So we know the crumb rubber has that, and we know the crumb rubber has lead and all these other, chemicals that they know are carcinogenic. So everyone who plays on it is kind of getting like hit from both sides, because the crumb rubber contains carcinogens and PFAS could be carcinogenic. So you're getting it every which way. And so I think that's another reason why it's hard to determine, like, if there is a higher rate of people who play on turf and get cancer, what's causing it? Is it the crumb rubber? Is it the PFAS? Is it both? How do you determine that? Right.
I know that soccer coach out at the University of Washington, Amy Griffin, has been tracking soccer players, although she's kind of stopped doing that now because it's not an official, list that she's putting together, a database. But since you did this, are other teams coming forward?
Just going to ask that, yeah.
And saying, well, we also have noticed a higher incidence of certain types of cancers. I mean, other occupations are, probably looking at what you were writing about and saying, hey, we have that same problem too. Have you heard anything about that, David?
Yeah, one thing that came up in the fall of 2023 was the NFL Players Union. They have for years been collecting data on player injury rates on artificial turf versus natural grass, and have really tried to campaign on that aspect of players getting hurt more when they're playing on turf. But for the first time now, they are expressing concern about PFAS exposure and the potential that may be leading to illnesses among football players. And I think, you made a really interesting point about the testicular cancer, because we did kind of limit ourselves with that first story on glioblastoma. I think if we sort of broaden the lens to a lot of other cancers, and there's some official effort made to survey other teams and other organizations, I feel pretty certain that we'd be talking about more than a handful of cases. And I think that's really what's been missing to this point is, on an official level, whether it's Major League Baseball or the NFL, someone wanting to really dig in to this issue and determine whether there's a there. And just in talking with former NFL players in the fall, their sense was that this was not something that the NFL would really want to be digging into. One ex-Eagle that I had talked to said, the league is still contending with a lot of fallout from the concussion litigation and all of the concerns about the health impact of those injuries. Why would they want to open another can of worms and have another health issue to be talking about? So, yeah, I think as time goes on, you're right, there will be more organizations wanting to look into this. maybe we're a little bit of canary in the coal mine in a sense. The thing that I was struck by, the NFL, I think, their revenue is somewhere around $12 billion a year. The stadiums have evolved so much in the last 30 years from, cookie cutter municipal stadiums that really were not always of the best quality to now stadiums themselves cost $1 billion to construct. So seemingly there would be a way to find the money to have natural grass in all of the stadiums if there was a will to do that.
Barbara Laker and David Gambacorta, investigative reporters for the Philadelphia Inquirer, talking about what they've learned and what every parent of a young athlete should know about artificial turf fields. That's going to do it for this week's edition of Green Street. Special thanks to our guests this week, investigative reporters Barbara Laker and David Gambacorta of the Philadelphia Inquirer. I'm Doug Wood. Patti and I will be back next week with another edition of the show. Thanks for listening.
There is no tomorrow.
I will say it again and again. Your phone is one of the biggest detriments to your health due to the non-native EMF and blue light coming from it. However, with One Tap Zap app from solar-powered Rusty, you can take care of blue light, Wi-Fi, flickering effect, all in one simple press of a button. One Tap Zap, you can disable Wi-Fi and Bluetooth completely. Get rid of your connection with a cellular tower, apply a blue light filter, reduce screen flickering, especially over low brightness, achieve sound sleep almost immediately, improve your mitochondrial health significantly, and maintain eye health with no more dry eyes, and numerous health benefits as well. One Tap Zap, you can check it out at improvementwarriorfitness.com/solar-powered. Unfortunately, it does not work for Android, just iPad, iPhone, and Macs at this time. But check it out, improvementwarriorfitness.com/solar-powered.
There is no tomorrow.
If you would like to support this podcast, then please visit me on Patreon to become a patron of Improvement Warrior Podcast. The podcast may be free for you, but it definitely is not free for me. So even if it's just $1 pledge, or $3, or $50, I would greatly appreciate it. Just search on Patreon for Improvement Warrior, or go to patreon.com/Improvement Warrior. It will also be listed in the show notes, along with other ways to support the show via our sponsors, or either via PayPal or Anchor support. To schedule your discovery call with me, simply go to improvementwarriorfitness.com/discovery call.
There is no tomorrow.
We are always looking for ratings for the podcast. It helps my podcast be found by others looking to improve their life and health, as well as it helps us get ranked higher. So please help us out so that I may continue bringing this life-changing podcast to you and others around the world. Just go to the leave a review section of your favorite podcast listening app and let us know what you think. 5 stars is preferred, but please be honest. Thank you in advance.